Okay, now let's practice in this video on how to write one function in terms of another. So in other words, I'm given in this example that I know I want to rewrite sine theta in terms of cosine theta, or sine theta is equal to something. I've got to rearrange it in that way. One of the only identities that I know of right off the bat that relates both sine and cosine together is our Pythagorean identity. So we're going to start there. So I have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to 1. And what I want to do is I want to take this identity and I want to basically solve the identity for sine. So we're going to subtract cosine squared theta to the right hand side, and I have sine squared theta is 1 minus cosine squared theta, but I have to take the square root of both sides because I want this in terms of just sine. And so I end up with sine theta is, remember when we take the square root of something we get both a positive and negative value, so that's 1 minus cosine squared theta. And that's what we're doing. We're just basically taking an identity and rearranging it for one particular term or another. Let's try that again, and let's look at cotangent in terms of sine. So again, I have to ask myself, is there an identity out there that relates cotangent with sine? There is. It's the quotient identity, which says that cotangent is equal to cosine theta over sine theta. But I only want my answer in terms of sine, and here I have it in terms of both cosine and sine. So how do I get rid of cosine and rewrite it in terms of sine again? So this is where we think Pythagorean identity again. So the Pythagorean identity says sine squared plus cosine squared is equal to 1, and I want to rewrite it so that sine is going to show up here in the numerator. So I say cosine squared theta is 1 minus sine squared theta, or in other words, cosine is going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 minus sine squared theta. So that's what I'm going to replace in the numerator over here. And cotangent theta is going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 minus sine squared theta divided by sine theta. So I rewrote cotangent in terms of only sine is what I've done here. Okay, let's practice that one more time. This is kind of like a puzzle, and you really just have to practice it a bunch. Don't be afraid if you start in one direction that you got to stop and try it again in a different direction. This last one we're going to look at says I want to rewrite tangent in terms of secant. Okay, there is a Pythagorean identity that relates these two together. It says tan squared x plus 1 is secant squared x. So if I want to rewrite this only in terms of tan, then I would subtract 1 to both sides. Tan squared x is secant squared x minus 1. Again, take the square root of both sides, and I have just tan x is plus or minus the square root of secant squared x minus 1. And so that's rewriting one function in terms of another.